Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate you joining me. All right, are we set? And I know things are breaking real time. I understand the president went on just a few minutes before I'm joining you. So we've only got about 30 minutes, so I want to make an opening comment, statement, and then I'll be happy to take your questions. First of all, it is absolutely essential that the United States stand shoulder to shoulder with our ally, Israel, against these barbaric actions of these terrorists. This was not a military intervention by Hamas. This was a gross terrorist action that had brutally killed now over 1,000 Israelis, 14 dual citizen Americans, many being held hostage in addition. The indications of babies being butchered, women being raped, senior citizens, Holocaust survivors being taken captive. This Hamas group, which has not represented the Palestinian people in Gaza and is horrific beyond words. It is absolutely essential that we stand with Israel and that nations of goodwill around the world stand with Israel in this moment of need. I know the president has said that he would expect and will be calling for additional defense funding for Israel. I will, of course, be supportive of that, as I will be supportive of standing up against other blatant aggressors, Vladimir Putin, in terms of his illegal, illicit invasion of Ukraine, where there's also been war crimes committed. The time for America, for democracies, for people who reject this kind of barbarity is now. We need to be amongst the ones who are counted to stand with our allies and fellow human beings against this kind of barbaric activity. On a Virginia note, my office has been contacted already by around 5 to 10 Virginians who are currently in Israel. We've helped some leave country through Amman, Jordan. We would encourage all Virginians who are in Israel, whether they be dual citizens, whether they be, there's a group of Christian tourists, there have been a group of Americans visiting Israel on a regular basis, to contact the American diplomatic representatives, and obviously my office stands ready to assist in any way possible. This is a horrific time, and I am focused not only on making sure Israel gets the ability to take out these terrorists in Gaza, and I know questions will be asked about whether there's an intelligence failure by the Israelis or by the Americans. There'll be time enough to look into those questions. But what I want, the Israeli intelligence and the American intelligence, to both help the Israelis go after these terrorists, but also to do all they can with our Israeli partners to make sure that this conflict coming out of Gaza doesn't extend to the West Bank or doesn't extend to Hezbollah taking further actions in the north of Israel. So I'm sure you've got a lot of questions, and I'll be happy to take those, recognizing that, again, I've got until about 3 o'clock, and I know there's a lot of questions.
Senator, our first question is Hannah Brand with Nexstar.
Hi, Senator Warner. I know you just touched on this lack of intelligence both by Israel and the U.S. that this was forthcoming, but are you concerned that there was not more forewarning based on our intel? And has there been any evidence that you've seen of Iran being directly linked to this? And if so, do you think they have some culpability here?
Well, again, I'm going to repeat what I just said. Clearly, this came as a surprise to the Israelis. And there will be time for appropriate review of how this wasn't spotted ahead of time. I've got hard questions for the American intelligence community as well. But remember, this military activity is still going on. A few hours earlier, Hamas sent hundreds of missiles into Ashkelon. We've got to make sure and particularly with our Israeli partners, that this conflict doesn't extend to the West Bank, doesn't extend to the northern part of Israel if Hezbollah were to intervene. Iran's ties to Hezbollah and Hamas have been extensively documented. I'm going to have more to say about that as more facts come in.
Senator, our next question will be Stephanie with Scripps.
Hi, Senator. Thanks for taking the time today. I know the White House has said they've been assisting Israel with pre-existing authority that they already have. At what point do you anticipate Congress needing to approve additional support for Israel, especially for critical defense systems like the Iron Dome?
Well, the president has indicated, I think, real time that he'll be making an additional request for Israel, for Ukraine, where, again, America's reputation and stance with our NATO allies is on the line. We have to stand up against this kind of barbaric activity, be it in Israel, which is just heinous beyond words, and we stand with the people of Israel and all its friends and supporters in the United States. But remember, it was literally in the last 3 or 4 days that Russia brutally sent a missile into a Ukrainian funeral and killed not only the folks at the funeral, but literally killed half of the members of the town. That was purely a civilian target. We and our allies will be counted. Are we going to stand up against this kind of aggression, this kind of barbaric activity? Are we going to stand up only in one area of the world and not in others? I think this is a time when our commitment to our principles is being tested, and I will be supportive of making sure that our friends and allies get the tools they need to be successful.
Do you think there's enough support for Israel-Ukraine combined supplemental appropriations or security assistance of some kind?
We are going, the fact that 10 days or a week ago, when we managed to avoid a government shutdown for 45 days at the expense of not providing Ukraine that short-term aid, the overwhelming majority of the Senate bipartisan was ready to stand by Ukraine. There is a sense that we need to do the whole fiscal year amount, and what I'm looking for from the administration is what that request will be. I think we'll get it shortly. I'm not going to speculate. There have been numbers bounced around, but I think we need to stand by Ukraine as well as, obviously, standing by Israel.
Just a reminder to please mute your devices when you're not asking a question. Senator, our next question is Mitchell Miller with WTOP.
Senator, thanks for joining us. Related to the situation in Israel, you mentioned the people from Virginia, and there's been concern about the fact that, as you know, there is no U.S. ambassador to Israel, and I know some of your colleagues have pushed for the confirmation of Jacob Lew. I wonder if you're on board with that and how quickly you think that could happen, and whether or not you are worried that that's affecting things on the ground right now.
Well, Mitchell, I can tell you as someone who is, particularly as my role as chairman of the Intelligence Committee, it's absolutely critical that America has Senate-confirmed diplomats around the world. A Senate-confirmed diplomat has greater sway with a local government than even some of the best of our State Department personnel who serve as charge d'affaires. The United States government as well needs to make sure that our military leadership receive the promotions that they've earned and not be played with as a political talking point. So I just hope and pray that all of those members who want to stand up rightfully, and I applaud them for support for Israel, that one of the ways we could show that immediate support when the Senate comes in next week is to immediately confirm Jack Lew as ambassador to Israel. We also have key diplomatic posts in region that still need to be filled, and that the 300 plus senior members of the military get their promotions so they can get into the jobs that they have earned, and they'll be able to exercise their judgment in an appropriate way and not be held up by a single senator.
Senator, our next question is Tom Fitzgerald with Fox 5.
Senator, thanks for talking with us today. Understanding this thing is moving at 1 million miles an hour in as many directions right now, I wanted to ask you about the hostages. It's estimated about 11 Americans right now are being held by Hamas. We spoke with a woman from Fairfax County who now lives in Israel, who tells us 5 of her relatives were taken out of the kibbutz over the weekend, ranging in age from 80 years old to 12 years old. What could the United States be doing to help with the hostage situation? What do you think we should be doing with the hostage situation?
Well, Tom, as you know, and I understand that this is still being sorted out. A lot of Israeli families don't know if their loved ones have been lost or held hostage. And again, the tenor of your question, when 12-year-olds and 80-year-olds are being held as human hostages by terrorists, we need to be absolute in standing and supporting Israel to be able to get those hostages back and to be able to be effective in eliminating Hamas leadership. Clearly, Israel has a long history of going the extra mile to get out Israeli hostages. A few years back, literally 1,000 Palestinian prisoners were traded for a single Israeli soldier. I'm not going to speculate on how this will play out with the Israeli government. I think it's also important that that we do all we can to bring Americans home, whether they be in Russia, whether they be in Iran, or now, unfortunately, whether they be hostages held by Hamas.
Senator, our next question is Andrew Hood with DC News Now.
Hi, Senator. Thanks so much for talking with us today. According to the Jewish Virtual Library, Virginia exported nearly $79 million in manufactured goods to Israel last year and has received $7 million in contracts to supply the IDF since 2015. How does the conflict change the economic relationship between the Commonwealth and Israel?
I don't believe it changes it in any way. Back when I was governor, I promoted greater trade between Virginia and Israel, two strong democracies. I'm proud of the fact that we have a lot of contractors in Virginia that support our own national defense. We have probably a higher concentration of defense-related contractors on a per capita basis than any state in the country. I'm proud of that. I'm proud of the fact that they support and do business with Israel as well. And if they are helping the IDF, I think more power to them. But it's also one of the hypocrisies that when people, even in the Virginia delegation, somehow say, shutting down the federal government doesn't have any effect. Well, there's not a defense contractor around that doesn't feel like a shutdown of the federal government, which will cut off their funding and their staffing. I've got legislation to try to make sure that contractors are reimbursed in the event of a shutdown, or even these short-term continuing resolutions. I was in Norfolk with our ship repair industry just last week, and the stupidity of these short-term continuing resolutions where you start and stop contracts. Anybody from a business standpoint knows that's a ridiculous way to run the government. We need to do our job and fund the government, fund our defense and the men and women who serve, and those who serve even in the private sector role supporting our defense industry.
Senator, our next question is Michael Martz with the Richmond Times-Dispatch.
Good afternoon, Senator. You mentioned the shutdown. What is the situation in the House of Representatives without a speaker? They're unable to do any business. And so does that bring Congress to a standstill in terms of dealing with these issues of foreign policy and war?
Well, Michael, I implore my friends in the House, Democrat or Republican, to elect a speaker. Now, this is in the hands of the Republican members of the House, although wouldn't it be great if at this moment of crisis, if we had 75% of both parties agreeing on something or someone, that kind of legislation ought to be brought forward in the House of Representatives. But I can't predict what's going to happen in the next 48 hours. I do know this, that a President Putin who thinks he can outweigh us and points to dysfunction in our government, or President Xi who has made the case in advancing China's interests for years that he feels like Western democracies are failing. And at this moment in time, when the first time in our history, we have a House of Representatives without a speaker, I think Americans and people around the world read into what kind of dysfunction, what's going on. And I just implore our friends in the House, and particularly my Republican friends in the House, to do their job. Let's get a speaker in place. Let's make sure that we act, because at the end of the day, resolutions supporting Israel don't provide the same kind of assistance as Congress literally passing the funding for our friends, be they in Israel, Ukraine, or other places that are being threatened by adversarial regimes, or in the case of Israel, terrorists.
Senator, our next question is Kelsey Childress with WSET.
Hey, Senator, thanks for taking the time. So we've increased police presence and law enforcement surveillance following this attack across the country. Do you have any concerns about the United States safety, or that something could happen here in the U.S.?
I think we always need to be on guard, particularly at these moments of heightened stress. And again, you see these barbaric actions taken by the Hamas terrorists. These terrorists who've done nothing for the Palestinian people in Gaza, or there's no movement towards an independent Palestinian state brought by these terrorists. I do know that our criminal justice, FBI, and others are on alert. Again, at a moment in time, groups like the FBI provide that additional protection on top of local law enforcement, and I think we need to stand by the men and women of the FBI now. Again, I'm disappointed sometimes there are others who have said they want to dismantle the FBI. I don't get it. In so many ways, our local law enforcement in Virginia, remember, it's our sailors based out of Norfolk who are on the Gerald Ford that is moving in to help protect the region. Those are Virginia-based sailors, so we have literally thousands and thousands of Virginians, both at the home front and in our military, both standing by Israel at this point, but also doing their job, making sure that we in America are safe.
The next question is Sean Davis with Wavy.
Good afternoon, Senator. I know that you hit this at the beginning. I couldn't really understand it, but if you could say anything else about what your office is doing to get Americans out, and do you have an idea of how many American citizens have been taken hostage?
Do not have an exact number on Americans that have been held hostage at this point. I don't think the Israelis know how many Israeli citizens are being held hostage. They're still going through these towns surrounding Gaza and literally seeing the dismembered corpse of babies. It's horrific. We have had outreach from Virginians, some who are dual citizens, some who are there on simply tourism, or viewing religious sites, both in the Christian faith and Jewish faith and the Muslim faith. We have tried to guide them to State Department entities. I said there was one couple I think we helped get a flight out of Amman, since many of the flights, commercial traffic, at least from the American carriers, is not going in to the main airport in Israel at this moment in time. I would urge anyone who's got Virginia families in Israel to first of all make sure that the State Department knows they're there. Contact on the ground. Those on the ground will have the best access on how to leave. But our office, and I know other members of the Virginia congressional delegation, stand ready to try to assist and help as well.
Senator, our next question is Tyler Englander with WRIC. Tyler? Okay, we're going to move on to Dave Cantor with Virginia Public Media.
Hey, Senator. Just a quick question, I guess, about the humanitarian situation in Gaza. I understand you are unequivocally supporting Israel, but the state has said that they plan to kind of like cut off any supplies going into the Gaza Strip. So that seems problematic for 2 million people who live there. So I'm just wondering how you square the potential humanitarian issue with support for a U.S. ally.
What we've seen from Hamas are barbaric terrorist actions. And I can understand the Israeli leadership desire to eradicate that Hamas leadership and activity. I also understand that one of the challenges that the Israeli intelligence and our intelligence has as well is to make sure and to do all we can to make sure that this violence doesn't extend to the West Bank, that it doesn't extend to Hezbollah agents in Lebanon and on the northern part of Israel. And navigating that over the coming days is going to be a real challenge.
Senator, our final question will be Danielle Sandler with WVNS.
Good afternoon, Senator. I just wanted to know, can you hear me?
Please go ahead.
Yes. I just wanted to know.
Danielle, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Wonderful. Sorry about that. What can America do to help the innocent victims that are stuck in Israel, who are trying to flee and come home to their families, or even the victims that are stuck in their homes? I have a lot of family and friends that live in Israel, and currently my cousin, she can't even leave her home. So
I think, again, the first step is for Israel to take back those communities that were invaded by these terrorists. And it appears that most of them have been cleared. But the fact that Hamas was still able to launch additional missile strikes towards Ashkelon earlier today shows that they still have capacity. One of the reasons why I think it's important that we stand with Israel as they try to eradicate that capacity. I do think in the coming days, as we hopefully will see less violence on the ground in Israel, that there'll be efforts to allow those American citizens, be they dual eligible or simply tourists, to leave. But let's take that a step at a time. I think the first and foremost requirement, obligation of the Israeli government is to decrease and eliminate the attacks against the Israeli citizens so that people can start making decisions about whether to stay or leave. But that's going to take, again, time will tell how, is that hours or days away.
Senator, that was the next question.
Let me just close with this. I mean, this is an extraordinary time for Israel. And as I said at the outset, there will be time to figure out why there was not more knowledge ahead of time. But I want to reiterate my call on the intelligence community, both in Israel and the United States, we need you on the front lines, making sure we ferret out where Hamas, again, terrorists, not military, terrorists, actions are being taken. And we need as well that intelligence community to work with the Israeli forces and others and folks in the region. And this is why I think it's important that the president sent Gerald Ford and that carrier group. The worst for all concerned, Israeli and Palestinian, would be if there was violence now breaking out in the West Bank or an attack by Hezbollah from the north. This is a moment in history. I know there have been statements coming out of Israel that this is their 9/11. There are over 1,000 Israelis that are now dead, and those numbers are clearly going up, and the number of potential hostages is still unknown. It's a time for the United States to stand by our ally. This is really a question of not kind of left or right, but basic decency and human values. Are we going to stand against terrorists? Are we going to stand against aggressors as well, I believe, in Ukraine, where I think the Russian forces have also created and committed war crimes. I point out that bombing of a funeral a few days ago. We, along, and I've been happy to see, at least so far, that Europe has stood strong with Israel. Europe has stood strong with us in Ukraine. For any country to walk away from either commitment at this point would be a disaster. And it would, again, shine a green light for authoritarian regimes like China or other terrorist groups in the Middle East, I think, to give them sustenance. So it really is an important time for our country to stand up, but I'll end with where I started. I've talked to friends who've got family and others in Israel. My heart goes out to the Israelis, to the Jewish people in America, and all the friends of Israel who are of all faith traditions. We will be there with you.